like the podcasting conferences that are held, mainly in America. So, for example, if I wanted to get onto more podcasts, I would be going to those conferences and literally going out and talking to the people that I saw as kind of the gatekeepers to that world, do you think? Or what would you say?
So Louise, so I mentioned I have my own podcast, right? It's called Maximize Your Social Influence Podcast. Yes. And literally today, 4.5 hours ago, I published a new episode, which is why I invested time to appear in 100 different podcasts as a guest. So actually, this is a really interesting topic. And there's an analogy here with general influencer marketing, which is you have these agencies, you have these people that say, oh, you want to get hooked up with influencers, we can help you do that. Pay us money.
Yeah.
And there's the other part that I teach you in the book, which is you can directly reach out to people, right?
Yes.
So the same as in podcasting. There are podcasting agencies. We'll get you as a guest on shows. I didn't use any of that. I reached out directly. Yes. But here's the thing, Louise, and I write about this in a later chapter in my book. The more influence you have, the more successful you're going to be when you reach out to people. So I also have a podcast. And for a lot of other podcasters, they want to appear on more podcasts as well.
Yes.
And the more influential my podcast is, the more excited they are to want to work with me and want to interview me on their podcast, right?
Yes.
So that's part of it. The other part of it is really the personalized outreach. I had a gentleman, I'm sure, Louise, you get tons of people who want to be on your podcast. Yeah. I had a gentleman, he wanted to be on my podcast and he pitched me, but it was really more for an entrepreneur's podcast, not for mine, which focuses more on digital and social media marketing. And I let him know and he goes, sorry, my staff, we're reaching out to a bunch of podcasts. And the idea is that, my methodology, and it's probably going to be similar with you, Louise, is I was looking at top podcast lists in terms of popularity on Apple and stuff, looking in the marketing genre, but realizing that not all of these podcasts were appropriate for me. And that's completely fine. If I was to look at the podcast episodes and if they were to talk about influencer marketing, would it be natural or not? Would it be aligned with that show or not? Or do they even do interviews? Because some podcasts don't do interviews at all.
Yeah.
So there you get a sense. And it's the exact same with businesses. If you wanted to work with an influencer and you hope they talk about you, would it be natural? If it
yes, is it a fit?
Is it a fit? I mean, I've had if you look at my profile photo here on Zoom, my profile photo, I'm wearing a black suit with a nice Brooks Brothers, navy blue, dress shirt. So I've had a custom suit company reach out to me. We'd love for you to talk about us on social media. We'll send you a free suit. But I don't talk about men's fashion. I'm not a men's fashion influencer, right? And it's just it's a great example of things that you need to be on the watch for. But Louise, absolutely. If you were to go, and I went to PodFest, which is the lesser known of the two major, I think podcast movement is the big one. I went to PodFest for the first time in March of this year, just before lockdown, right after Social Media Marketing World. And yes, I mean, absolutely. You meet people there and that gives you the ability, because it's all about relationships. We're human beings, right?
Yes.
So if you have a chance to meet someone and you jive, then obviously, you could invest time in going to that, in going to that with that objective of, I want to appear as a guest on more influential podcasts, and it might improve your chances of doing that. Or you can, without doing that, try to befriend, support, build rapport with the person digitally, which we sort of have to do with COVID-19, and try to influence that process. And Louise, this process for being on guest podcasts is the exact same process if you want to appear on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on a blog, or anywhere. It's the same thing. And once people realize that, you realize that podcasters are some of the greatest influencer marketers, because there are so many podcasts that are just focused on interviews with influencers, right? They're always trying to get influencers on their show because they know it's going to help their branding, and maybe that influencer will help promote the show and reach a greater audience. That is influencer marketing right there. And podcasters don't even realize it. And you're trying to tap in by being a guest in other shows, you're trying to tap into the same thing from the flip side. So this is just a great example of how all this works.
Well, I'll give you an example today of somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, and we're new connections. He sent me a connection request, and he said he works with employee advocacy for a large firm in the UK. And he says, I really love your podcast. I'm getting a lot from it, da, 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 da. And I replied and I said, oh, thank you so much. Because no matter how many listeners you have, very few of them actually reach out and say, I listen and thanks and I like your podcast.
Agree. Yeah. It's sort of a lonely world in podcasting, isn't it?
Yes.
You see the number, you're getting tons of downloads, but yeah, I hear you.
Is anyone listening? And he said, so I replied and I said, oh, thank you so much. I was genuinely flattered. And then he said, actually, would this be a great topic for your podcast? Now, if he had come straight out and said, I'd like to come on your podcast, blah, blah, blah. I'd have gone, well, I don't know who you are. But we've had a conversation about, the podcast. I know he's a listener from the things he said. And actually, I think his topic would be a great fit for my podcast. So it's just, it's interesting how, and it's a good fit as well. It's not like he's reached out to me and said, so somebody else said they'd like to come on the podcast, but they wanted to talk about issues that are not appropriate for my audience. So I had to politely say, look, it's not really a great fit. So I think when you're pitching, because there's two things here, Neal, isn't there? There's looking for influencers, and then there's the people who want to become influencers as well.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about brands looking for an influencer. What do you say to somebody who says that they want to become an influencer?
Yeah. And that's really what got me to write the book, because, it was back in 2018 when the questions, whenever I spoke and with clients, started to focus more and more, not just around influencer marketing, but how can some of these people become influencers themselves, right? They have friends that are getting paid $500 to post on Instagram and all this stuff. Yeah. So it is, and that's why in the book I include a chapter on how to become an influencer, knowing that a lot of marketers and entrepreneurs and business owners reading that would want to try to become a little bit more influential. So, it's funny. I was just on a webinar yesterday with my friends at Agora Pulse, and my topic was how to convert your employees into becoming LinkedIn influencers. So there's this whole employee advocacy, social selling side to this that we could talk about. But really, when we think of an influencer, right, it's someone that is publishing content online and has built a community. So publishing content, what does that mean? Well, they could be a blogger, or they could just be regularly publishing status updates on LinkedIn. Now, there's a rule that I talk about in the book called the 99-1 rule. And this is a concept that was developed maybe 15 years ago, before social media. But the idea was that on the internet, 90% of internet users are lurkers. 9% actually engage with content, i.e., comment and nowadays share. Yeah. And then only 1% are content creators. And I think it's a really, really good analogy to look at. LinkedIn probably has 700 million users now, right? Yeah. How many people on a daily basis are actually publishing content? It's probably close to that 1%, maybe 2%, maybe 3%. So that's only, say, 20 million people. That's it's a lot of people, but on the other hand, it's the top 1, 2, 3%. So if there are employees of yours, customers, or people in your niche that you want to influence that are regularly publishing, and they've built up a base of connections and followers that's over 1,000, which they probably have because they've been consistent with that. They are sort of the nano influencers on LinkedIn. And therefore, if you want to become that, it really comes with that consistency and having a subject matter, right? If you're all over the place, it doesn't really build influence. Yes. It's when you have a subject matter that you're an expert at, you're passionate about, maybe you do business in, and it's that consistent publishing, the consistent also engaging, and not just when people comment on your post, but actually reaching out and engaging with other people, engaging on your feed, doing searches on LinkedIn for other posts that you can engage on as well, to sort of build up your authority in the space and to expose yourself to other people. This is the exact same thing you would do it on Instagram, right? Or on Twitter or on any other social network. So it's the same thing. And I know it sounds really easy. It's actually not easy, and it's very time consuming. Yeah. But if I'm in El Paso and I do corporate gift boxes, but I'm really trying to sell the Tex-Mex lifestyle or Tex-Mex food, which I'm assuming that your friend is doing, that's what I'd want to be talking about, right? Yeah. And through that, becoming known as sort of that person, and in an influential social network like LinkedIn, you just never know the types of people that might end up connecting with you or seeing that content and saying, a friend of mine was looking for, unique foods for their corporate gift, or maybe we need more diversity in our organization. We need more diversity in our food box. I don't know, right? We never know what makes people tick, but that's really
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what really gets you on people's radar, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, so I have I'm part of a peer-to-peer mastermind here in the UK, and my friends in the mastermind said that basically the content that I share on LinkedIn, I know people have connected with me and follow me because I talk to them about how to use LinkedIn, and I get really good engagement on my posts. And my friend said, "Oh, I talked about something like completely random, and got so many views, and that was excellent." And I thought, well, there's no point in me doing that. People don't care what I say about the housing market or a new chocolate bar. And yeah, I might get lots of people commenting on it, but it's not going to increase my me as a person who knows about LinkedIn, is it? So I think, exactly. The way you described that, Neal, is exactly how I work with people on LinkedIn.
Some people sort of think engagement equals influence, but that's not the case. So every once in a while, Louise, you see these pretty stupid posts on LinkedIn. My boss thinks that no one engages on LinkedIn. I want to prove him wrong. Please like this post and send him a message. I mean, really? So that post, okay, if you dupe the algorithm, right, that post may get a lot of engagement. I don't remember the name of the guy who wrote the post, right? No. And it's not about a subject that I'm interested in. But on the flip side, if you have a lot of influence, you need to yield that influence, right? If you have a lot of influence and you stop publishing or your content gets less and less engagement, you need to do something to build that up. So that as a tactic to help remind your audience that you're there by reaching more people in the algorithm, that might be of interest, right? And those people resonate with you because they know you. Whereas this random Joe was reaching all these new people, but I doubt that he got a lot. I doubt he got much out of it other than just getting a lot of likes on the post. Yeah. So that's a mistake that I hope those listeners don't make. It has to be relevant content, relevant audience, relevant engagement.
Definitely. I mean, one of the phrases I lifted from your book as well, you were talking about the everyday expert. This is early on in the chapters, or the mommy blogger. So I've 3 kids. I'm married. I've got 3 kids at home. They're 10, 12, and 14. And we like to cook and bake and stuff. And when you go to Google and you look for recipes, it's all these mommy bloggers. And it's fascinating to me how they work, because they're sharing a recipe, but they're like selling a crock pot.
Yeah. And what's really funny, Louise, I mean, I talk about this in the book. So I have a blog, nealschaffer.com. It used to be called Maximize Social Business. And I've always had a lot of guest bloggers. I used to have someone who guest blog in something called Blogger Outreach, but that is influencer marketing. They were, before Instagram, it was mommy bloggers. They were the hot thing that all the brands wanted to reach out to. And they're still, especially when you think about like cooking or just entire social networks like Pinterest.
Yes.
They have a tremendous amount of influence. Now, some of them have translated that to Instagram, right? So, where do you want to build your influence? You can build great influence on Instagram. It doesn't mean you're going to get a lot of web traffic, because that's not how Instagram works. So others have just stuck to their blogs and have done really well, or may have just used Pinterest as their main network. So there's no one way to do it. There's many different ways, but it really depends on, your objective. Where's your audience? And many times, Louise, when we talk about someone who wants to become an influencer, what are the networks that you use, that you like to use? And what are the content mediums you feel comfortable with? Because if you enjoy doing videos, you're going to want to become a YouTuber. Yeah. And you can use those videos throughout social media. If speaking is your thing, you'll want to become a podcaster, right?
Yes.
If you love to write, you're going to want to become a blogger. So there are things that, because you have to have the passion for it. If not, you're going to stop. How many podcasts stop after like 5 or 10 episodes? The stats are incredible, right?
Yes, I remember that. I know you've been on Johnny Dumas's EO Fire podcast. Yes. And I interviewed him on my podcast, about a year and a half ago, I think. And he said something like the statistics around people who give up before episode 10 is phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. You can't do it. And, I was really honest with my podcast listeners. I started my podcast as sort of a content marketing initiative, right? Oh, I need to have a podcast. This is back in 2013 before the day. And I stopped doing it for like a year or two. And it was only until, like I said, about 9 months ago, where it's like, oh my God, what am I doing? Because I wasn't a listener of podcasts myself. Right. And so I created a podcast episode. If you really want to influence a community, you got to become a member of the community. You got to know their speak. You got to know what their expectations are. And I've been doing podcasting wrong for like 6 years.